We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Hey guys! This is Uruzi and I'm back with part 8 of What If Naruto Was a Simple Teenage Shop Owner. Things aren't always as simple as they seem. Just because he found himself in a new world, Naruto shouldn't have forgotten this. Now he must deal with fallen angels, devils, perverts and God, all while maintaining a relationship and running his store. Things can never be simple for him. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 28. Naruto. The blonde hummed in response at the sound of his name. He turned his head towards the voice and saw the concerned eyes of Rias Gremory staring back at him. Did you have anything to do with that? What? The shinobi seemed confused at the girl's question. Sitting at his counter was Rias' peerage in its entirety, Gasper included. The vampire was covered from head to foot with a thick pair of oversized sweatpants and sweatshirt. Despite his nervousness at being out in public, the boy had been pretty enthusiastic in participating in the conversation the peerage had been sharing, the conversation Naruto had completely missed out on. The strange sightings around time. Rias attempted to clarify. When she was once again met with a confused look from the shop owner, the girl decided that she needed to get a little bit more in depth. For the past couple of nights there has been several strange sightings around the city. Different beasts ranging from an oversized cat with 2 tails to a giant turtle swimming in a lake. The creatures all disappeared shortly after being sighted. I was just wondering if you knew anything about it. The girl finished. Naruto gave a thoughtful hum at the girl's words before he began to slowly return to his snack making. I haven't heard anything about it. I'll be sure to keep an eye out for any weird stuff though. The blonde reassured the devil with a soft smile. This response seemed to satisfy the girl as she nodded at the boy before returning to her conversation with her peerage. With Rias' attention now away from him, the blonde dedicated his full focus onto his treats. The boy looked strangely serene as he carefully sculpted a tower out of whipped cream. While outwardly the shinobi looked as calm as a nun, inwardly it was a completely different story. The blonde was having a very different type of conversation with some of the tenants of his body. Really? I let you guys out for one night and you get caught. Naruto mentally yelled. His shout was met with a series of disgruntled mutterings that echoed throughout his mind. I just want to point it that only Isabu and Matatabi got caught. Shut your sand-covered mouth, Shikaku, before I set you on fire and seal it shut. A vaguely female voice shouted out, interrupting the first voice. Silence followed the voice's outburst, showing that the original had wisely followed its orders. Look, Naruto-kun, the feminine voice spoke up once more. We weren't aware of the surveillance equipment that this world contained. Okay, I can accept that. But, what about Isabu? You were laying in the middle of a lake. Just before sunset. How do you explain that? Naruto asked through his mental link. I was hot. Naruto sighed at the massive turtle's response. He didn't know what other response he expected from the creature, considering its soft-spoken nature. Look, if I'm going to let you guys out more often, UCA. As much as I enjoy listening to you fuss at my idiotic siblings, you have guests. Kurama's voice cut right through the blonde sentence. Almost immediately, the shinobi switched his attention to what was occurring outside of his head. Naruto-kun, Dulio. A small grin spread across the shop owner's face at the sight of Exorcist. The man was dressed in his usual priest garments as he strode across the shop to the counter. His appearance caught the attention of Rias' entire peerage as they kept their eyes locked on the man, even as he took a seat at the counter next to him. I see business is going well. The man commented as he reached into one of his pockets. After a small amount of digging around, the exorcist pulled out an unwrapped lollipop. With a deft flick of his wrist, the wrapping disappeared from sight and the lollipop was swiftly put into the blonde's mouth. Yes, better than ever actually. At this, Naruto took a quick glance at some of the customers within his store. Nothing seemed too out of whack, if you ignored the various fox ears and tails attached to some of the customers. Though, that could be simply chalked up to a simple act of cosplay by the people. The shinobi assumed that was the reason his human customers weren't exactly freaking out as several yokai ate only feet away from them. By the way, Naruto returned his attention back onto the exorcist. Thanks for sticking up for me back in heaven. The blonde's casual remark earned him a small chuckle and a wave from the lollipop lover. No problem at all. Michael was being a bit stuck up back there. I just wish he had actually listened to me instead of ordering a manhunt on you. The two shared a small laugh at their shared memory. Their laughter seemed to catch Ria's attention as she turned to face the duo. Her movement caught Dulio's attention as he turned his own head towards the girl. Ah, you're Surzek's little sister, aren't ya? Rias, right? Rias nodded slowly at being addressed so casually. Only a few weeks ago, Dulio would have been considered one of her greatest enemies. Now the man was addressing her like she was so long-lost friend. Yeah, I figured. He talked about you a bunch. Made the whole entire peace meeting take a bit longer than expected. And just like that, the awkwardness the girl was feeling dissipated as a groan left her mouth. To hear that her brother had managed to embarrass both himself and her in front of some of the most powerful creatures in existence trumped any type of residual animosity she felt towards the exorcist. You should have heard him. I'm almost 100% certain that he was signing the treaty just to impress his little Rias-chan. The volume of Rias' groan increased in magnitude at Dulio's words. The angel let loose a loud laugh at the girl's ire for several seconds before turning his attention back on to Naruto. You got a little time to talk? Dulio asked while licking away at his lollipop. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the question before setting down his can of whipped cream. What about? The blonde asked. His question caused the angel to send a side glance at the group of devils sat directly next to him. The man looked to be debating something for several seconds before coming to a conclusion with a lackadaisical shrug. A team, a team, a team. Dulio confirmed the blonde's question with a small nod. The angel removed the lollipop from his mouth before leaning his upper body against the counter. After everything that happened during the meeting with the magicians, the higher-ups of each faction decided that there needed to be some type of countermeasure in place of events like this from occurring. They realized that the union between the three factions is possibly one of the biggest ones in the history of, well, history. It's obviously going to attract attention and nope. Don't want to be a part of any group. The whipped cream was back in the blonde's hand as he returned his focus back onto his desserts. A small chuckle greeted his ears several moments later, making him look up at the now laughing angel. You didn't even let me finish, man. The angel said in between his laughter. But, I understand. I figured your answer would be no. It was my answer until my boss made me agree to it. Dulio said as he rose from his seat. He flashed a small smile towards his fellow blonde before turning to face the door. Well, it was nice meeting with you. I'm sure Michael will send me back to try to convince you again, so I'll be seeing you later. The angel then stopped to look at the group of devils. By now, Rias and her peerage had been not so subtly spying in on the conversation and had their full attention on the man. I'll be seeing you all later. Adios. The man held his lollipop in the air towards the group before popping it back into his mouth and walking out of the store. The group of devils and the god watched the man stroll down the sidewalk before disappearing from their sight around a corner. What did he mean when he said he'll see us later? Surprisingly, Issei was the person to voice the thoughts of the group. The mysterious farewell by the man had managed to earn all of their curiosity. I don't know, but I do plan on finding out. Rias said as she scooted off her seat. She placed a small amount of bills on the counter's surface before turning to address her peerage. Let's head back to the club room for now. One by one, each of the devils rose from their seats and began to follow the girl out of the shop. Kaneko was the last to leave since she stopped to receive a kiss from her boyfriend. The blonde had managed to sneak in a bag of cookies into the girl's pockets as a surprise treat for her later. He watched with a small smile as she pushed past the doors of his shop and disappeared along with her friends around a corner. The smile on his face soon disappeared as a light glow began to emit from below the counter. The shinobi glanced down and caught sight of a glowing seal on his wrist. With a silent sigh, the blonde removed his apron from his waist before retreating into the back room. A second later, the blonde came running back out and proceeded to refocus his attention back onto his whipped cream. In reality, the real Naruto was no longer anywhere close to his shop. The teen arrived at his destination in a golden flash. Almost immediately, he turned towards the only couch in the room that so happened to be occupied by one infinite dragon god. You came. Ophis stated as she removed her headphones from her ears. Naruto rolled his eyes at the girl's apathetic tone as he made his way over to her. With a loud grunt, the blonde flopped onto the other end of the couch before stretching his legs over its edge. I told you I would. That's the whole point of the seal since you say the shop is too loud. The blonde said as he stared up at his ceiling. His response came in the form of silence, prompting him after several seconds to bend his neck backward to look at the dragon. He saw that she had her gaze steadily locked onto him and that probably wouldn't be changing anytime soon. I require your assistance, the dragon said after several long moments of silence and eye contact. Her words made the shinobi sit up from his laid-out position. An inquisitive look was on his face as he leaned towards her. You need my help? What could be bothering the mighty Ophis so much that she needs my help? If she found the statement to be annoying, Ophis didn't show it as she continued to stare into Naruto's eyes. What you said before, the Cow's Brigade, the dragon paused and closed her eyes. For the first time since meeting her, Naruto heard the girl release a sigh. The sound was almost inaudible and lasted only for a short moment before she opened her eyes back up. They are growing out of my control. Naruto blinked at her words. Even though they didn't seem like much, the gravity behind the girl's sentence had managed to floor the shinobi, causing him to become slightly slack-jawed. So, you're saying you can't control the Cow's Brigade anymore? Naruto's question earned him a harsh glare from the girl. She managed to hold up the look for several moments before it dropped as another sigh slipped past her lips. They're like roaches. I find one nest and destroy them, and 10 more replace them. My home now has a giant roach and tiny pests running around it. Naruto actually felt a twinge of sympathy within his chest at the sight of the obviously upset dragon. To have your home overtaken by some foreign presence was a horrible thing to go through. The blonde knew that if Ophis hadn't attempted to kill him during their first meeting, he would be full sympathetic of the girl's plight. Unfortunately for Ophis, she did attempt to kill the blonde and hadn't admitted to still not wanting to do so, losing her a large amount of his sympathy. Plus her title as an actual god made him very skeptical of what he could do to actually help. What exactly do you need my help with? The Bond questioned more out of curiosity than anything else. He wasn't expecting any real solid response from the girl, but he still wanted to hear how she would reply. Killing them. The girl's tone was as deadpan as ever as she asked for assistance murdering hundreds of people. At this point within their relationship, the blonde couldn't really find himself too shocked by her answer, causing him to just sigh and roll his eyes. You know I can't and won't do that, the blonde replied. His words seemed to stir something within the dragon as she began to rise up from her seat. But with your clones. Naruto turned to face the girl as his ears picked up on something he never heard in the dragon's voice. It was a small quiver, one similar to that of a child who was attempting to hold in tears. Even though her face did not reflect such emotion, that little fluctuation said it all for her. For once, the dragon was actually hurting on an emotional level. Unlike any physical pain she may have felt during her battle with the Great Red or himself, she couldn't immediately heal from it. The fact that this was her first time experiencing anything of the sorts most likely made the pain that much more intense. All of these factors added up to form an emotional cocktail within the blonde. And despite what every single fiber of his common sense was telling him, he began to actually feel sorry for the dragon god, as odd as that sounded. Have you tried talking with them? Naruto inwardly sighed as the words slipped past his lips. Even in the end, he couldn't stop himself from at least attempting to hand out advice. He wouldn't stoop as low to do her killing for her, but he would try to help. Talking. Ophis looked genuinely confused as she echoed Naruto's words. The blonde huffed at her response before sitting up further in his seat. Yeah, talking. Asking them to leave. Being polite. Stuff like that. The shinobi attempted to be as clear as possible as he spoke. It was during these moments that the blonde hated the lack of social interactions the dragon had. I ordered the Great Red to leave. I told the Cow's Brigade to halt their actions. They did not. I erased them. It took everything within the shinobi to not facepalm at Ophis' words. That was the type of response he was hoping not to get. Okay. How about asking them nicely to leave? Maybe even saying please. The blonde offered. The completely apathetic look he received from the dragon gave him a pretty strong hint on how she felt about that suggestion. Why should I say please when it's my home? Came Ophis' dry response. And, as much as the blonde hated to admit it, she had a pretty good point. If someone was invading his home, he shouldn't have to say please to get them the hell out. He should have every right to literally kick them out the door. Unless they're a god. The blonde corrected himself as he glanced over at Ophis. If that was the case, it was best to just wait it out. Well. The blonde paused to rack his brain for a response. He didn't want to just say go destroy everyone in your home, to the dragon, yet that was the only answer that was coming to his mind. Fortunately for the blonde, his decision-making time was put to a hold as a loud knock echoed throughout the room. A visible sense of relief overcame him as he rose from the couch and dashed towards the door. Without even checking to see who his guest was, the blonde turned the knob and swung the door open. Naruto-san, we have a problem. The frown on Naruto's face dropped like a stone because standing at his doorstep was a haggard-looking Kiba. What's wrong? Is everyone okay? Is Kaneko okay? Naruto immediately fired off at the boy's statement. Mentally, the blonde was already preparing to flash towards his girlfriend's location the second the devil confirmed his worries. Everyone is okay. You just need to see this. Inwardly, Naruto released a small sigh at the confirmation of his girlfriend's safety. He honestly didn't know how exactly he would have reacted to hearing that Kaneko had gotten hurt somehow. Probably similar to how Ophis wants me to act towards the Cows Brigade. The blonde thought to himself as he turned to look back at the dragon. His jaw tightened when he noticed that she was no longer sat on his couch. He couldn't sense any anywhere in the house, leaving him to believe she had returned back to the dimensional gap. Let's go, Kiba. The blonde said as he turned his head back towards. The young devil nodded at him before taking off down the streets. Naruto threw one last glance back at his empty couch before shutting the door behind him and following after the devil. This could be a problem. The blonde couldn't help but think to himself as he stood next to Rias Peerage. Night had overcome Kuo, allowing the teens to release their devil features to the world. Kaneko and Rias stood by his side while he worriedly directed his attention to the display in front of them. The wall that the group was standing in front of belonged to Kuo Academy. Its usually immaculate brick walls was tainted with what looked to be blood. The thick, viscous liquid dripped slowly down the surface, slightly obscuring its message. Death to the tainted birds and beast, and the new false god they follow. Issei read the writing out loud in a slow voice. Down the line of people, Naruto sighed out loud as his head met his hands. This is certainly an issue. The group turned to look at Sona as she spoke out loud. The girl seemed to be alone for once as her peerage was nowhere in sight. Her face was as serious as ever as she stared at the writing on the wall. I am assuming that you have already contacted your brother? Rias nodded at her friend's question. The first thing she had done when she had stumbled upon the grotesque display was send a message to her brother. Despite how annoying she found the man, this was not something that she was going to hide from him. Who do you think did this? Issei said, voicing the question that was on all of their minds. Silence followed him as each person within the small group mentally searched for an answer. Maybe an angel? They do mention tainted birds and beasts in the message. Sounds a lot like fallen angels and devils. Kiba spoke up. Almost immediately, Sona gave a negative shake of her head as she stepped forward towards the group. This amount of blood and violence from an angel? It doesn't seem very plausible, especially with the new treaty. The intellectual replied. Rias turned to face her old friend with a slight frown on her face. It could be a rogue angel. Someone who is on the crest of falling. It isn't too hard to believe that not every angel was very happy about the treaty between the factions. Some probably still held hard feelings towards us. Rias said in an attempt to reason with the class president. Sona didn't shake her head at this, but instead closed her eyes and allowed her head to fall slightly. Once again, plausible. But let us not make any assumptions concerning this matter. The new treaty complicates things, especially if one of the other factions had a hand in this. We'll simply wait for Surzek-sama's reply and move from there. The heiress responded. What about tomorrow when school starts? We can't let our classmates see this. Issei spoke up. It wouldn't do well for the academy's reputation if word got out that someone did something like this on school property. I'll have it covered up by my peerage later tonight. I'll run the story that a group of delinquents vandalized the school during the night. Sona fired back. As the members of Rias Peerage nodded at her words, Naruto had to mentally sing his praise for her. It was an amazing show of leadership to be able to come up with a thorough plan so quickly, especially with so many stakes on the table. What do you think about all of this, Naruto-kun? The blonde turned his attention to his right as Akino voiced her question. A small frown graced his features as he stood silently staring at the girl for a few moments before returning his attention back towards the wall. I think Sona's plan is a good one. There's no need for us to act rash. The blonde responded. His response seemed to be enough for the girl as she nodded before turning to Rias. Okay. Let's head back to the club room and wait for my idiotic brother to reply to my message. Hopefully, he doesn't take forever like he usually does. The redhead sounded agitated as she spoke. Naruto couldn't help but chuckle at the girl's dislike of the man. It was pretty endearing to witness the relationship between the two. As a group, Rias left with her peerage. Kaneko was the last one to leave as she received a hug from the thoughtful blonde. Once she had gone, only Sona and Naruto were left at the wall. The two stood in shared silence for a long period of time, simply staring forward at the wall in front of them. Naruto-san. The class president was the one to break the silence as she called out her companion's name. At the sound of his name, Naruto turned his head towards her. He was surprised to find that the unflappable mask that had just been in place in front of her friends had fallen. Now, he could see the raw emotion, mainly worry and anxiety, clear as day on her face. What do you think of this? Naruto blinked at the girl before turning his head back towards the wall. He remained silent for several seconds, seconds which felt like hours to the young devil, before opening his mouth. I think you made the right decision. I have a feeling, probably the same feeling you have, that this is going to be a lot bigger than it originally seemed. Not getting ahead of ourselves is the best way to go for right now. Out of the corner of his eyes, Naruto saw the girl visibly relax at his words, filling him with a small amount of confusion. Sona and him hadn't really been close enough for him to think such a simple statement from himself could earn such a reaction. Idiot, you're not looking at this from the right angle. Naruto's confusion was further increased as his original partner, Kurama, spoke up. What do you mean? Look at her. With a soft grumble, Naruto briefly returned his attention back onto the young Citri. He was surprised to find that he seemed to have the girl's full attention as she looked solely at him. She is quite literally looking up to you. But why, though? The blonde questioned, earning him another sigh from his partner. Because you're a god. Because you're an accomplished shop owner. Because you've managed to save her and her friends multiple times. Because you have earned the respect of some of the most powerful creatures in this universe, including her sister, somehow. Are you honestly not seeing this? Well, when you break it down like that. Naruto honestly did feel a bit stupid after Kurama's explanation. It made sense that the girl would at least have some sort of admiration when it came to him. You've done a really good job keeping this school together and running. Just keep doing what you've been doing and everything will turn out well. Naruto finally spoke out loud after his extended period of silence. He watched as the girl's face lit up in surprise at his words before quickly settling. She offered him a small nod before turning her back to the blonde and the wall. Thank you for the advice, Naruto-san. Know that it is greatly valued and cherished. Now, it was Naruto's turn to be surprised. The girl's wordings was very odd, weird even. He didn't have much time to question her about it before she was already too far away. All of this is just too confusing. The blonde huffed out loud. He had expended all his mental energy for the day. Time to get some rest. I'll deal with all this in the morning. And with that, the blonde disappeared off campus in a golden flash. Naruto had expected that when he stepped into his house, he would be able to immediately head to his bed and take a well-deserved nap. He figured in the worst-case scenario that Ophis would have returned wherever she had disappeared to and would be waiting for him at home. The dragon's completely antisocial attitude would mean their conversation would most likely be a short one, giving him plenty of time to rest. That was not the case, however. As much as the teen wished that was the case, it wasn't going to be. He knew that as soon as he opened the door to his home. The two people that greeted him spelled that out very clearly to him. Naruto-kun. Naruto ducked out of the way to avoid a flying hug from an obviously excited Kuroka. As the girl smacked soundly into the closed door behind him, the blonde couldn't find it within himself to feel much pity as he gazed up at his second guest. You've missed 87 days of work and now you think you can just show up to my house randomly? Naruto questioned his wayward employee. Valet didn't look the least perturbed by his boss' words as he remained standing still in the blonde's living room. I don't work at your stupid shop anymore. The devil replied. Naruto scoffed at the boy's words as he made his way deeper into his home. You sure do until I fire you or I get a letter of resignation, the shinobi said as he collapsed down onto his couch. From the corner of his eye, he could see Kuroka picking herself up from her jump. It didn't take very long for the Nekasho to make her way over to the couch he was occupying and plop herself down onto his outstretched legs. The teen didn't even bother telling her to move, much to her pleasure, as he kept his attention on the descendant of Lucifer. Why exactly are you both of you in my house? Naruto finally spat out the question. The sudden reappearance of the duo in his home at the exact same time couldn't lead to anything but horrible things for him. The sigh that Vala let out after his question only served to confirm his thoughts. We came here to warn you, Naruto-kun. The teen cut his eyes over at Kuroka as she spoke. Her usual playful demeanor seemed what repressed while she sat on his legs. Warn me about what? Naruto spoke as he sat up on the couch. If something managed to rattle Kuroka's mood, then it must have been big. It's the Cows Brigade. Vala started. They've overstepped their boundaries. Chow Chow, that egomaniac freak, that was all the devil could manage to get out before a loud screeching suddenly filled the room. Kuroka collapsed onto the floor, screaming loudly while clutching at her ears, while Vala collapsed down to his knees. Naruto was the only one who didn't seem affected. Thank Kami for chakra. The shinobi thought to himself as he kept the flow of chakra constant in his ears. Without it, he was sure that he would be in the same position as Valley and Kuroka. It was because he was unaffected by the noise that the teen was aware enough to notice the rippling in the air that was taking place in the middle of his living room. Just as the rippling reached a climax, the very fabric of space seemed to come apart as a rip formed in the boy's room. Naruto had only a second to react as a small body came shooting out of the rip. He quickly leaped up the couch and caught the body-turned projectile before it could slam into one of his walls. As Naruto fell back to the floor, he managed to catch the briefest of glimpses into the tear before it suddenly closed, silencing the shrieking sound. That was unexpected. The blonde couldn't help but think to himself as the shrieking stopped. He took a brief glance over to Valley and Kuroka and saw that the two were slowly recovering from having their ears blasted. Seeing that the two were in a somewhat better shape, he directed his attention back onto the object he had caught from the dimensional tear. His eyes widened exponentially when he noticed just who exactly he was holding. It was obviously Ophis, but something was very different about the girl. The usual aura of power that unconsciously radiated from her had been suppressed to just a dwindling flame. The girl was shaking as if she was suffering from frostbite. Her skin looked pale, even paler than its usual color. Lastly, her gray eyes looked a sickly shade of black. Naruto could just make them out through the girl's partially opened eyes as he cradled her body. What the hell happened to you? This was by far the most confusing and potentially terrifying thing that had occurred to him since arriving. If someone, or something, managed to inflict such a large amount of damage to the dragon, then that thing had an unimaginable amount of power. Naruto strained his ears to hear the girl's voice. Its usual soft volume was even lower now that she was in this condition. I tried talking. It didn't work. And with those words, the dragon fell unconscious, leaving herself in the care of one very confused shop owner. Chapter 29. I knew they planned on acting against her. I just didn't know it was going to be so quick. Valis sat idly on one of Naruto's foldable chairs with a white mug in his hand. To his side sat Kuroka in a similar chair with her own mug. The contents of their cups seemed vastly different, with Kuroka's looking as white as the moon while Valis sat at a dark brown. Across from the duo sat a rather interesting sight. It was a sight that neither thought they would ever witness in any sort of capacity within their lifetimes or in the afterlife. Sitting on the sole couch of the room was Naruto and Ophis. The dragon was wrapped in a mass blankets, looking very similar to a swaddled child. The convulsions the girl had been having earlier seemed to have settled somewhat as her body only shook slightly under her wrappings. What was interesting about the girl was her position. The god was quite literally snuggled into Naruto's side. Her head was laid comfortably in the boy's lap while the rest of the body sat very far into his own personal space. The blonde looked only slightly bothered by the development as his hand rested calmly against the sleeping girl's scalp. Is one of you finally going to explain just what the hell happened? How did this happen to her? Naruto glanced down at the shaking dragon with a large frown on his face. Despite everything that had happened between the two, It was worrying to see the dragon in this type of condition. That's what we came here to warn you about. I just didn't predict that they would move so quickly. Valley muttered the last sentence before taking a long sip from his mug. A low sigh left the devil's lips once he pulled the mug away from them. While I was gone from my job, the devil made sure to throw up air quotes at this, causing Naruto to roll his eyes. I was observing the Cows Brigade. I had heard reports from some members of my group that they had been acting odd since Ophis had started visiting. Turns out they had teamed up with some evil god to hurt Ophis-san. Naya, Kuroka suddenly spoke up. This managed to earn her a glare from the young devil. She quickly responded by blowing the boy a raspberry, causing Valley to roll his eyes at her before returning his attention back onto Naruto. As crude as she put it, she is pretty much correct. Recently, a mysterious figure has been spending a lot of time in the dimensional gap. There's been a lot of whispers that the figure was a god. Which one, I'm not entirely sure of, but it must be a major one to cause this much damage. Valley finished. Naruto nodded at the boy's explanation, but a slight confusion still covered his expression. Is there even a god that could have managed to do this to her by themselves? Isn't she supposed to be, well, pretty much all-powerful? Plus, why leave her like this? She feels more weak than hurt. If someone really did manage overpower the dragon god, the blonde was sure she would be dead. Instead, she was left shivering like a child, but still very much alive. We're not entirely sure. Like I said, I thought we would have a little more time to investigate. I just came to warn you. The devil's cold nature came into view as he set his mug down and flashed Naruto his usual apathetic look. Naya, don't lie, Val-chan. I remember you saying just how worried about Naruto-kun and how you had to warn him as soon as possible. Kuroka teased with a coy smile on her lips. As soon as the words finished leaving her mouth, Valley whipped towards her with a furious look on his face. Shut your mouth, woman. I said no such thing. The devil barked out loudly to the Nekashu. Kuroka didn't look the least bit perturbed by the shout. If anything, the smile on her face only grew larger by the boy's agitation. Don't be shy now. When we were living together, you couldn't help but talk about him all the time. Kuroka stopped talking in order to duck a flying mug. A loud cackle left her throat as she took off towards the kitchen with Valley hot on her heels. While the Nekashu looked as happy as she could be as she ran, Valley's face was a furious mask mixed with a tinge of embarrassment could be seen by the blush on his cheeks. You keep your lying mouth shut. I am tired of hearing your voice. The devil's shout was followed by a loud giggle which only seemed to heighten his agitation. He soon disappeared into the kitchen after the Nekashu. Several seconds later, loud banging and crashing could be heard coming from the room, followed by more giggling from Kuroka and cursing from Valley. They better not break any of my ramen packets. The blonde thought to himself before standing up from the couch with Ophis in his arms. For some reason, he was slightly caught off guard at how light she was. His view of her as a nearly unlimited being of power had obscured the fact that she was still in the form of a child. This is not how I expected our relationship to turn out. Naruto thought to himself as he stared down at the girl. If it wasn't for the sporadic shaking her body was doing, she would have looked oddly at peace. Her appearance really did make her look like an innocent young girl. It was odd how such a simple disguise could hide so much power. Though, is it really a disguise? Naruto thought to himself as he walked her to the guest room of the house. If it were a disguise, he'd been somewhat aware of the girl's true mass. As a dragon, she should have weighed a lot more than he could carry. Instead, she seemed to weigh even less than Kaneko did. As Naruto debated the idea whether Ophis' disguise truly was a disguise, he entered the guest room. Almost absent-mindedly, he laid the girl down onto the room's bed. With the dragon now out of his hands, Naruto stood awkwardly over the side of the bed, looking down at the resting girl with a soft gleam in his eye. Should I? The blonde thought to himself as he stared down at the defenseless dragon. Due to the nature of their relationship, he would most likely never get another chance like this. Might as well. Naruto reasoned to himself as he began to reach down towards the girl. His movements were slow as his hand steadily approached the girl. He didn't want to disturb the girl from her sleep and see what he was trying to do. Even in her weakened state, Naruto had a hunch that she could still cause quite a bit of damage if she wanted. It took several long seconds of careful movements, but eventually Naruto got to the point that his finger was only an inch or two away from the girl's face. He hesitated only for a second before he pushed his finger forward into her cheek. His eyes widened when his finger met flesh. So soft. The shinobi couldn't help but think to himself as he poked Office's cheek. As soon as he realized that he had actually thought such a thing, the teen quickly retracted his hand as if he had fire. Unfortunately for him, his sudden movement seemed to have roused Office from her unconsciousness as she began to stir. Slowly, her eyes began to open as she became aware of the world. It took her several seconds for her to fully awake, and when she did, she immediately locked eyes with Naruto. The two remained staring at each other for several seconds. No words were exchanged between during the time. The awkwardness the blonde had been feeling earlier seemed to fill the room the longer the silence continued. Why am I wrapped up? Office finally broke the silence with her question. Naruto glanced down at her body and saw that the dragon had been silently struggling to break free from her prison of blankets during their silence. You were shaking, so I figured you were cold. The blankets were supposed to keep you warm. Naruto explained. His explanation earned him a dead-eyed expression from Office as she briefly stopped in her struggling. I am not cold. Oh. Naruto stated before reaching down to free the girl from her bondage. This is pretty tight. The shinobi couldn't help but think to himself as he briefly struggled with the blanket bindings. It took him a bit of effort, but, after several seconds, he managed to undo the wrap. The blankets fell to Office's side, allowing to stretch her limbs. The shinobi allowed the girl to do so. In the meantime, he took a seat onto the bed. It didn't work. Naruto had to strain his ears to hear the girl's voice. He turned to face her and saw that she had her head angled down towards the bed. What? The blonde questioned. He hadn't fully heard what the dragon had said, and the curious side of him demanded he know. I asked, Office started off in the same soft voice. They did not listen. So I killed them. I killed most of them until. The dragon paused at this point. Naruto watched in shock as she began to shake. With her face hidden from him, he couldn't tell if it was out of anger or sadness. They took my power. They stole it. That human and the dragon. Naruto could almost taste the venom within Office's voice. As she raised her head, the shinobi could see that the shaking was clearly coming from her anger. Her face screamed murder as her eyes stabbed into his own. I'll destroy them. I will erase them. I will get back what is mine. They stole what is mine, so I shall reap their souls. For one of the few times since their original meeting, Office's voice rose to a shout. Her face was showing the most emotion it had shown in years as it twisted into a hate-filled visage. Even in her weakened form, her power caused a physical reaction within the room as the bed and furniture creaked loudly in response to it. As all of this was occurring, Naruto could do nothing but look sadly at the girl. He didn't even need the use of his empathetic abilities to tell that she was in a lot of pain. Any pain she may have felt at being betrayed was probably massively overwhelmed by the fact that someone stole a literal part of her from her. I'll help. Naruto's voice managed to cut through the girl's anger. Within a moment, the rage that had been so apparent within her seemed to dissipate as confusion took its place. She slowly settled down back onto the bed while staring at the blonde. What did you say? Office slowly questioned. Naruto sighed at her question before looking directly at her face. I said I would help. At least in terms of getting your powers back. The shinobi explained almost solemnly to the girl. His explanation seemed to have no effect on the girl's conclusion as she simply blinked owlishly at him. Why? Naruto wanted to groan at the question. The dragon was making it very difficult for him to show his sympathy, because no one deserves to have their home and power taken away from them. Plus, I trust you with your power than any other person. The blonde muttered the last statement beneath his breath. Even with the low volume of his voice, Office seemed to pick up on his mutterings as the confusion on her face cleared. Trust. The girl whispered before descending into silence. A large part of the shinobi wanted to further explain his statement to the god while his other half demanded that he let it rest. The confused, yet pondering look on her face eventually allowed the latter half to win out as he rose from the bed. I'll help you, Office. But, for now, just try to rest a little. If you need anything, feel free to use the seal. The teen's words seemed to go completely over the dragon's head as she gave no physical reaction to even hearing it. Naruto decided not to press the issue and simply decided to quietly exit the room. He softly shut the door behind him and moved to make his way to his kitchen for a snack before promptly running into a crouched Kuroka. "Ouchie, Naya," the Nekashu exclaimed as she landed flat on her ass. Her hands moved to rub her sore and rather sizable rear, only to stop when she noticed the blonde was shooting down a disappointed look. "What?" Kuroka questioned innocently. Unfortunately for her, she had been around Naruto enough for the teen to know that absolutely nothing was innocent about the devil. "You were spying on our conversation." It wasn't a question in any sense. The shinobi was simply making an inarguable statement. "I wasn't spying. I just so happened to walk by, Naya." The look that she received from the blonde clearly showed that he did not believe her one bit. Instead of keeping up the facade, the Nekashu quickly relented as she climbed back up to her feet. "Fine. I was spying," the girl admitted with a defeated look on her face. The defeat soon turned into a sly grin. "I think you're being so sweet by helping Office-chan out. You're such a hero, Naya." Naruto rolled his eyes at the Nekashu's words before walking past her towards his kitchen. Kuroka pouted at being ignored so easily by the teen before following after him. "Don't be like that." Kuroka whined out as she followed the teen. Her words went entirely ignored by teen as he opened up the door to his fridge. The blonde stuck his head into its cold environment and kept it in there for several seconds, seemingly searching for it. Eventually, he delved his hand into the machine and produced a jug of milk. "Where did Valley go?" Naruto questioned before taking a quick swig from the jug. Kuroka stared entranced by the sight for several seconds before eventually snapping out of it. "He left." The girl mewed out as she kept her eyes firmly locked onto Naruto. Because of this, she got to witness the moment that pure trepidation overcame the teen's features at her words. "He left without you?" Naruto questioned hesitantly. When the girl nodded back at his questions, a low groan slipped through his lips. His arms and head seemed to be suddenly overcome by gravity as they both fell downwards. "He told me he was tired of taking care of me, that big jerk. So, it looks like we're roomies again." The girl shouted out excitedly as she threw her hands up. She glanced over at Naruto to see if the blonde was mirroring her looks, and found that he was doing nothing of the sorts. The completely apathetic look that she was giving him said the exact opposite. "You know, with Office all messed up, the guest room is taken. That means that there was nowhere else for me to stay except for." The devil trailed off as she shot Naruto a pointed look. Inwardly, she was hoping that the boy would pick up on her hint. "You can sleep on the couch." And, all the hope that Kuroka had immediately came crashing down. She began to pout childishly at the blonde's decision. "Only on one condition though." The pout on the devil's disappeared at Naruto's words. Her expression turned into one of curiosity as she locked eyes with him. "You're going to confront Kaneko." And just like that, any enthusiasm that the Nekashu had came shooting out of her at the blonde's demand. "Naya, you know I see. You can and you will if you want to stay with me. I'm not going to force you to do anything, but I won't let your presence in my home affect my relationship with my girlfriend. You're her sister and you should at least speak with her," Naruto firmly stated, dashing away any of Kuroka's hopes of talking her way out of the situation. The look on the teen's face solidified his seriousness as it was said in the stone-cold mask. It was the meanest she had ever seen the blonde. I. The woman stuttered. Conflict was clear on her face for several seconds as she attempted to think some way out of the situation. Eventually both her mind and body decided enough was enough and relented, causing her to release a defeated sigh. "Fine. I'll talk to her tomorrow." For one of the first times since meeting him, Kuroka felt herself become truly agitated at the blonde. The stern way he was acting with her now was nothing like the way she had met him. "Fine. You're so mean now that you're a fancy schmancy god, Naya," the girl exclaimed as she threw her arms up in frustration. Despite the laws of gravity and motion existing, the movement didn't manage to jostle her breasts out of her dress. "Well, this god is taking a nap. Feel free to whatever is in the fridge. Just don't touch my ramen." Naruto paid zero attention to the woman's gravity-defying breast as he walked back to his room. Kuroka watched the teen walk down his hall before disappearing around a corner. Several seconds later, a soft slam resonated through the air. "Such a asshole, Naya," Kuroka grumbled out before heading over to the blonde's fridge. Just because the teen was going to act mean to her didn't mean she would stop herself from enjoying a well-stocked fridge. She was nervous. Why was she so nervous? She shouldn't be this nervous. It wasn't healthy for her. Stop being nervous. Kuroka thought to himself, unknowingly mimicking the words Naruto spoke out loud at the same instant. Unfortunately for her, she was so caught up in her own thoughts that she didn't hear the teen. This caused him to lean over the counter and flick her temple. Hey! What was that for? The Nekashu exclaimed as her hands went up to nurse her forehead. Your nervousness is distracting me. Just come down. Distracting you from what? There's no one in here. Kuroka yelled while pointing to the mass of empty tables and chairs that sat behind her. Naruto didn't seem the least bit put off by the comment as he reached beneath the counter and produced a glass of strawberries. My job doesn't suddenly end when there's no customers in here. A shop owner is constantly working to make sure their shops are running at 100% efficiency. Naruto said while popping the top off of the jar. Naya, you're full of yourself. All you do is sit here and make treats. Kuroka responded with a roll of her eyes. It is much more than just making snacks. It's making a memorable experience for my customers. Bullshit. Ask any one of my customers. They leave this shop satisfied hunger-wise and spiritually. You are so dram. At that moment, the doors to the shop swung open. Kuroka stopped herself at the sound before turning her head to see who had walked into the shop. Her heart almost dropped out of her chest when she met with her little sister who was standing in the entrance of the store. No words were exchanged between the two as they simply stared at each other. It had been several years since the two sisters had met and it was showing now. The nervousness that had been previously present within Kuroka exploded forth with much more intensity while Kaneko stood apathetic. The disinterested look the younger girl was sending her only pushed the older Nekashu's anxiety further forward. Chiron. Kuroka found herself muttering without thinking. Her embarrassment had pushed her to say something and the girl's old name came spilling forth. She immediately knew that it was a mistake, especially when she noticed the devil twitch at the sound of her voice. Despite the girl's supposed agitation with her sister, Kaneko said nothing as she stepped forward into the store. The doors closed almost silently behind her while she made her way towards the counter. Both Kuroka's and Naruto's eyes were locked on her as she walked to the counter's entrance, entered into the employee space and made her way over to her boyfriend. Once again, no words were exchanged as the girl swiftly ascended the blonde's lap and made her throne upon his lap. Then silence. With her seat now captured, Kaneko was free to continue her staring at Kuroka. If the older girl had been nervous before, she was much more now that the girl was so close. The Nekashu actually began to perspire as her nervousness began to eat away at her. Shiro, Kuroka managed to stutter out. Unfortunately for her, she would never get a chance to fully complete her sentence. My name is not Chiron. It is Kaneko. Kuroka shut her mouth at the sound of her little sister's words. The girl had hurt her just then. She had hurt her bad. After all, she was the one who had helped name the girl. Though, her reaction was to be somewhat expected. Kaneko. Kuroka said slowly, as if she didn't know how to properly pronounce the word. It was foreign to her and felt foreign leaving her mouth, especially now as she looked down at the girl. Kaneko. Kuroka stated much more firmly now. Unseen to Kaneko, Naruto began to grin. I'm sorry. The Nekashu started off. Her eyes instantly went back onto Kaneko's face to search for any sign of a reaction. When she saw none, a small sigh slipped past her lips before she continued talking. I'm sorry for abandoning you. I'm sorry for putting all this pressure on you. I'm sorry for ruining your childhood. I'm sorry for making everything so difficult for you. By the end of her statement, Kuroka was basically in tears. Yet, even still, Kaneko's face remained apathetic. The girl's face was just a mask of neutrality as she looked at the crying Nekashu. I did it to protect you. The girl let out a hiccup as the tears came spilling out her eyes. I just want you to know that. All I wanted to do was protect you. I know I didn't do a good job of it, but that's all I ever wanted. At this point, the girl's face was flushed as a constant stream of tears traveled down her face. She leaned her head to wipe her face clean with her sleeve before looking back up at Kaneko. Kuroka's heart skipped another beat when she noticed that the young devil's face hadn't moved an inch during her SPE. Any hopes of reaching her sister seemed to be slipping further and further away. I know. And, just like that, Kuroka's hopes came soaring back up. Her entire attention was focused on the girl as she awaited her next words. I know you tried to protect me, but you failed. And with a single sentence, Kuroka's hopes were dashed away. The girl's head fell in a vain attempt to hide the tears that had started to fall again. I don't hate you. Like an emotional roller coaster, Kuroka found herself lifted up by her younger sister's words. You couldn't have known for sure what would happen to me. You made the decision you thought would be best for me. So, you forgive me? Kuroka questioned as she lifted her head up to look at Kaneko. When the older Nekasho spotted the girl nodding ever so slightly, jubilation erupted within. She rose up from her seat, reached over the counter and snatched the girl up into her arms before proceeding to dance around the shop with her. Naya. Imuto-chan forgives me, Imuto-chan forgives me, Imuto-chan for. Put me down. Kaneko's voice cut through her sister's excitement, briefly snapping her out of her trance. Kuroka shot the girl an apologetic grin before gently setting the girl back down onto the floor. With her feet back on the ground, Kaneko turned to face the counter. Can we go home now? The girl asked to her boyfriend. Naruto nodded at her question before making his way around the counter. While the blonde was closing up, Kuroka nervously tapped her younger sister's shoulder, causing the girl to turn towards her with a raised eyebrow. Ah! Kaneko-chan. I should have told you this earlier but… stay. I know. Kaneko said, interrupting the older girl. Kuroka blinked owlishly at her response before confusion came crashing down on her. Wait, how did you know that but you didn't know I was going to be here today, Naya? Kuroka questioned. Things weren't really adding up together well in her mind. Naruto told me. Kaneko responded as straight-faced as always. This revelation almost floored Kuroka as she quickly turned to face Naruto who had just managed to get out from behind his counter. You told her? Kuroka screamed at the blonde. Of course I did. I told her everything when I was taking my nap. I have experience when it comes to surprises like this and it's not a good idea to just spring it on people. Naruto stated flippantly as he moved over towards Kaneko. Kuroka could only stare baffled as her younger sister deftly climbed on top of the shinobi's shoulders. I really had nothing to worry about. The Nekasha thought to herself as the duo settled into their piggyback ride. The fact that Kaneko had been aware of her and still decided to see her meant that all the stressing she had done had been for absolutely nothing. Come on Kuroka. The Nekasha was snapped out of her thoughts by the sound of the blonde's voice. She saw that the teen, along with her sister, was standing by the doors of the shop and were looking back at her. I'm coming, Naya. The woman shouted before running towards the duo. As she ran, a large smile was present on her. She finally had the chance to make up for the biggest mistake in her life. She could finally make it up to her little sister. She could finally step into a new chapter of her life. I'm glad I took that nap. Naruto thought to himself. Kuroka walked slowly behind him, talking excitedly as she did. Nothing that the Nekashu was saying really registered with the blonde, but Kuroka seemed to either not notice or not care as she kept talking. Kaneko had her head tucked into his collarbone and had seemingly stumbled off into sleep if her snores were anything to go by. At the moment, none of that really mattered to Naruto. As cute as he found his girlfriend at that moment, she was only an afterthought. What was really holding his attention were the two people that were currently standing in front of the door of his house. The first person was obviously female. The flowing black dress she had on did little to hide her body's natural curves. A huge black hat sat on top of her head and managed to hide most of her curly blonde hair. She had on a long blue cape that was covered in sparkles and pink flowers. The other person. Naruto wasn't too sure if they were male or female. What he was sure of was the fact that this person was not human. The fact that the person looked to be a 10-foot-tall wolf creature tipped the blonde off to that. The two giant horns that protruded from the creature's forehead only confirmed his thoughts. Fei-chan and Wolfie. Kuroka shouted excitedly before taking off towards Naruto's front door. Her shout managed to rouse Kaneko out of her sleep, making the young girl raise her head to see what was going on. Giant wolf. Is he here to fight? The Nekashu said sleepily as soon as her eyes landed on her boyfriend's two guests. I don't think so. Kuroka knows them. The blonde said in reply. Okay. Back to sleep. Kaneko muttered before laying her head back onto the blonde's shoulder. By the time the teen had managed to make his way, the girl was already back to sleep. Naruto-kun, look! Some of my friends showed up. Kuroka was beyond excited as she gestured towards Blonde. At this point, the blonde was on the first step leading to his door, providing him a much clearer view of his guests. Yeah, that's definitely a wolf. Naruto thought to himself as he craned his neck upwards to look at the creature. The shinobi managed to catch a glimpse of the wolf's golden teeth behind its maw when the creature stared back at him. Why are your friends at my house? Naruto questioned while looking over at Kuroka. His attention didn't stay on her for very long when the other female of the group cleared her throat. Hello, sir. The girl started off excitedly. Naruto noted that the girl had a very thick foreign accent. He wasn't quite sure from where, but it was definitely noticeable. You're Naruto, right? Naruto nodded his head at her question, causing the smile on her face to blossom in size. Awesome. Well, my friend and I were sent by Valisama to help protect Ofa-san. The girl finished with a small hop into the air. Naruto stared at her for several seconds before a sigh slipped past his lips. Does this protection involve you being near her all the time? The blonde's tired voice seemed to suck the energy out of the girl. She went quiet and still as a slightly perplexed look crossed her face. Well, yes. In order to make sure no harm comes to her, she will have to be under our constant observation. The magician explained. This meeting wasn't going quite as she had expected. Yeah, that's not going to happen. If Luffy hadn't been confused before, she definitely was now. The teen's dismissive answer was the exact opposite of what she had expected. Why not? The girl questioned while taking a subtle glance over to her partner. She could see that the wolf was eyeing the dismissive shop owner with no small amount of agitation in its body. Well, Ophis is staying in my house right now. You being around her would mean you would have to stay in my house a lot. I don't want that, so you guys can leave. Naruto said before walking past the two towards his door. With his back turned to the duo, he missed Fenrir taking a threatening step towards him, only to be stopped by his female companion. Naruto, Luffy started off, only for the sound of Naruto's door opening to interrupt. The girl had to put more strength into holding back her wolf partner as the child of Loki pushed harder against her. Even with Ophis in her weakened state, she still holds a significant role in the universe. We cannot let her be assaulted any further. Luffy said in an attempt to reason with the teen. Unfortunately for her, she was attempting to argue with Naruto Uzumaki. She might as well have been talking to a brick wall. And she won't. If she's staying in my house, she is safe. The blonde said over his shoulder, not even looking at the girl as he spoke. This seemed to be the breaking point for Fenrir as he ripped his arm out of Kuroka and Luffy's grip and marched up to the blonde. Look, you stubborn idiot. Some of the strongest people in the world have that dragon on their kill list. I don't care how strong you think you are, you cannot protect that dragon. You're not strong enough, you're not smart enough, and you can't be in two places at on. EY boss, Ophis is awake and said she's hungry. One of Naruto's clone popped his head into the doorway, interrupting the wolf's point. As soon as the clone realized that his creator was not alone, he shut his mouth. You can give her a cup of ramen. See how she likes it. The clone nodded at the original's orders before taking a quick look at Luffy and Fenrir. The glance lasted only a second before the clone disappeared back into the house. With the clone now gone, Naruto turned back towards the wolf with a raised eyebrow. You were saying? Naruto asked. Inwardly, the blonde was cheering at the amazing timing of his clone. That exchange couldn't have gone any better. You're feeding the infinite dragon god ramen? The wolf questioned in disbelief. Naruto turned a hard gaze onto the wolf at the sound of his questioning tone. Yeah, I am. What's wrong with ramen? It's absolutely Fenrir's statement came to a quick close when Kuroka slammed her hand over his mouth. With his voice now effectively muffled, the blonde's harsh gaze softened before he turned to Luffy. Look, go back to Valley and tell him everything is good. I can handle Ophis. Also tell him to start coming to work. Those were Naruto's parting words to the girl before he walked into the confines of his house. As soon as the blonde disappeared into his home, Kuroka removed her hand from Fenrir's mouth, allowing the wolf to turn to her and snarl. What the hell was that for? The wolf growled out. Kuroka rolled her eyes at his agitated state before putting her hands on her hips. I just saved your life, Naya. Don't disrespect ramen in front of Naruto. Ever. Kuroka yelled. Fenrir huffed at the girl's statement before turning away. It was obvious he wasn't too aware of the severity of his situation. With the wolf dealt with, Kuroka turned over to Luffy, who honestly looked pretty confused. Pen-chan, you should listen to Naruto. Go tell Valkuin that everything will be okay, Naya. Don't waste your time here. Kuroka stated cheerfully. Luffy could only nod hesitantly at the Nekasha's words. This seemed good enough for the well-endowed woman as she smiled the younger girl a large smile before walking into Naruto's house. The door slammed behind her a second after her exit, leaving Luffy and Fenrir standing on the doorsteps alone. That didn't go well. How's the ramen? It isn't horrible. Naruto smiled at the response, knowing that was most likely the best response he could hope to get from the dragon. The duo was sat at the blonde's dining room table, each with a cup of ramen in front of them. Kuroka's snores could be heard from the other room as the devil lay passed out on the couch. Kaneko was nowhere to be seen or heard since she was buried in a mountain of blankets within the blonde's room. How are you feeling? Better. Ophis whispered before taking in a spoonful of ramen. Naruto released a pleasant hum at the answer before going silent. The only sound present in the small room was the occasional scraping of the dragon's spoon against the ramen cup. Trust. Ophis mattered, breaking the silence and returning the shinobi's attention back to her. What did you say? Naruto's voice made the girl look up from her ramen. It was at that moment that the two met eyes. If you help me get my powers back, you will have my trust. The dragon said. Is that really what it will take? Naruto questioned. When Ophis nodded in response, the blonde grew silent. The silence only lasted for a few seconds before the blonde erupted into laughter, slightly startling the dragon. If that's really all it takes then. Ophis, I'll help you get your powers back. And that is a promise. I never break my promises. Naruto shined a bright smile at the dragon to finish off his promise. And, for one of the first times in her lifetime, Ophis found herself returning the smile with a small one of her own. Trust. Chapter 30. It reeked of death. It? You couldn't tell if it was a male or female. It was a skeleton. Ah. Naruto hummed gently to himself while writing into a small notebook. Across from him sat Ophis, who had a half-eaten slice of cake in front of her. The duo was sat at one of the many tables within the blonde's shop. The store itself was bustling, considering the early hours of the day. So we have a skeleton god that reeks of death that worked with a dragon that has the ability to steal your powers? Naruto read from the notebook. When Ophis nodded in response, he sighed. He could already tell that this wasn't going to be as simple as he had hoped. Okay. I'll start asking around to see if I can find anyone that matches that description. Ophis nodded once again but said nothing as she instead focused her attention on to the rest of her cake. Naruto watched the dragon for several seconds as she steadily consumed the slice of red velvet before turning his attention to the main counter of his store. Narukuin. The shinobi shook his head at Kuroka's excited greeting. The girl was behind the counter of the store, dressed in her usual outfit but with one of the blonde's trademark smocks covering her front. Even with the smock providing her a lot more decency than she usually had, the mass of male customers flocked around the counter made it clear that the garment didn't completely hide the devil's sexual appeal. Look what I made! The woman shouted before holding up a cupcake. From his position behind the writhing mass of male customers, Naruto managed to get a good look at the creation. That actually looks really good. The shinobi thought to himself as he ran his eyes over the treat. The tiny dessert was approximately 4 inches tall. 2 inches of the cupcake was a golden, flaky dough that was shaped perfectly into a star. Tiny dots of red littered its surface. The other 2 inches of the treat was made up of a snow-white cream in the shape of a spiral. Countless sprinkles sat on top of the cream, giving the treat a very colorful appearance. Looks good, Kuroka. Naruto shouted while giving the girl 2 thumbs up. She seemed to blush at his gesture before ducking her head back underneath the counter. When the mass of males saw that the object of their affection was no longer paying attention to them, they turned around aggressively to confront the cause. When they spotted the 6-foot, lean, muscular, blonde, smock-covered form of one Naruto Uzumaki, they quickly turned back towards Kuroka. The blonde shook his head at their behavior before beginning to towards the counter's entrance. Naruto-san. The shinobi stopped in his track when a noticeable female voice made itself known over the stream of male voices. The teen turned towards the sound of the voice and was surprised to see Artemis striding her way towards him. I apologize for not scheduling an appointment. Naruto found himself chuckling at woman's attempt at a joke. Despite her reputation, he was quickly learning that she could be rather funny when she wanted. But I figured this occasion would not exactly require one. The woman said. Naruto cocked his head to the side out of curiosity before opening his mouth to speak. You're welcome here anytime. So, what do you? Ma'am, do you mind if I buy you a treat? You look like you could eat one. A slice of cake? Some cookies, maybe? The blonde was interrupted by one of the male customers that had been crowding around his counter only moments ago. It seemed that the guy had caught sight of Artemis and switched his libido-fueled attention onto the god. Artemis gave the man a look over with an unhidden amount of disgust in her eyes. Instead of reacting verbally, the god raised her hand in front of the man's face, much to his curiosity. His curiosity came to a quick end when a flurry of golden powder erupted from the goddess' hand and slammed into his face. Naruto watched as the man attempted to blink away the golden powder. With each blink the man took, his movements became slower and slower. It took almost a full minute of blinking, but eventually Artemis' magic took effect as the man dropped to the floor, completely unconscious. Disgusting. That's no way to approach a woman, Artemis said as she looked down at the immobile. Naruto poked the man with the side of his foot, eliciting a rather snore from the male. After confirming that the man was still alive, Naruto moved his attention back onto Artemis. I don't think you'll mind if I move the conversation to the back of the shop, right? Naruto asked her. At her nodded response, Naruto sent a quick glance over to one of his disguised clones, signaling for it to deal with the unconscious man before guiding the woman to the back room of the shop. Am I correct when I say that I spotted the infinite dragon god sat outside, eating cake? Artemis as she stepped into the back room. Naruto nodded his head in reply as he pulled out 2 chairs for them to sit on. Fascinating. Such a docile act from a creature of such power. It would be as if I managed to get Typhon to sit and have tea with me, Artemis said as she took the offered seat. Naruto didn't even bother correcting the woman's illusion of his control over the dragon as he sat in his own seat. The two settled so that they were face to face with one another. Despite your control over the dragon, I came here to actually warn you, Artemis stated. Naruto raised an eyebrow at this while leaning slightly forward in his seat. Warn me about what? The blonde asked, his voice filled with curiosity. Hades. Hades? Your god of death? Yes. My unfortunate uncle. Artemis sighed as she leaned back into her chair. Why are you warning me about him? Did he say he wanted to harm me? Naruto asked out of curiosity. When Artemis gave a negative shake of her head, the blonde grew more confused. He hasn't outright said he wanted to harm you. The goddess paused momentarily. If he hasn't said that he wanted to harm me, how do you know? Naruto questioned. As the goddess of the wild side again, the shinobi knew he probably wouldn't like the answer. My brother, Apollo, on top of being the god of the sun and a bunch of other things that I won't state because I know it fuels his ego, is the god of prophecies. This title grants him brief glances into the future. Yesterday, he came to me with a new one. One that involved Hades specifically plotting against you. The goddess finished, sending the room into silence. The silence hung in the air for several long seconds as Naruto contemplated the woman's words. Are your brother's visions always true? Naruto asked, breaking the silence in the room. As much as it pains me to admit, yes. They're always correct in one form or another. I don't quite understand how it all works. I like to stick to the more practical things in life. Naruto let out a small huff before a chuckle left his lips. It was amusing to him to see a sibling rivalry play out on a godlike scale. Why would he want to hurt me? I haven't exactly done much to hurt him. I think. Naruto added the last statement as an afterthought. He still had a pretty large lacking of how gods operated, so for all he knew, something as simple as selling candy could have irritated the death god. It's complicated. Artemis seemed to grow weary at this. Naruto raised an eyebrow as the woman released yet another sigh. My uncle is a prideful man. He has pride in himself. He has pride in his domain in the underworld. And, surprisingly, despite the treatment he receives from the others, he has pride in our pantheon. He believes the Greeks to be superior to all the other pantheons. This wouldn't be too much of an issue if he also did not believe that the existence of other pantheons is completely unnecessary and can only be a hindrance to the Greeks. Are you saying that because people think I'm a new god, your uncle wants to destroy me? Artemis nodded slowly at his words, causing Naruto to groan loudly. He most likely sees you as an upstart that can be easily snuffed out. Unlike the other pantheons, he won't have to worry about the mass of followers or support from fellow gods within the same pantheon. The goddess explained. Just how strong exactly is your uncle? He is considered as one of the 10 strongest beings in existence. Of course he is. Naruto thought to himself. At this point within his life, he wasn't even surprised by the woman's answer. The presence of an ultra-powerful god wanting his death only seemed fitting. Well, thank you, Artemis. Can't say I don't appreciate it. The blonde said as he rose up from his seat. The goddess followed suit while offering the shinobi her hand. No problem at all. Your presence within this area has greatly benefited the health of the wild. I would hate for your influence to be snuffed out because of my wayward family. The woman spoke as Naruto shook her hand. The contact lasted only for a brief second before the two let go. With a small smile, the shinobi guided the woman out of the back room and back into the shop. Naruto-kun. The shinobi's attention was immediately drawn towards Kuroka as she shouted his name. The woman ran up to him and stopped only inches away from him with a worried look on her face. I don't think Valley. Naruto had already begun to drown out the Nekasha's words while his eyes drifted over to Ophis. A frown seized his lips when he noticed two people he had specifically told to stay away from the dragon were around her. Ophis-sama, please. We need you to come with us. You are in mortal danger. No. Ophis-sam. She already said no. Luffy stopped herself when she heard Naruto's voice. Both Fenrir and her turned to see the teen standing menacingly behind him. His arms were folded across his chest while a large frown graced his face. I thought I told you guys to go back to Valley. Naruto said as he looked at the duo. His eyes briefly met with Fenrir's as the wolf flashed him an intimidating glare. The look was easily shaken off as he instead focused on the blonde magician. We did. Valley-sama told us to come back. Luffy started. Naruto let loose a grumble at her words before interjecting his body between the duo and Ophis. That's fine, but I'm going to have to ask for you to stop harassing my customers. The blonde said. What if we buy something? Then we can be customers too and we can just sit here. No, Ophis spoke up once more, stopping the magician's train of thought. At the interruption, the trio turned to look at the girl. I don't want you near me. The dragon said while staring at the two. When they didn't reply after several seconds, Ophis turned her attention over to Naruto. May I have more cake? The dragon gently asked to the shinobi. At her words, the frown on his face instantly disappeared as a small smile took its place. Sure. Same flavor? No, actually. May I have vanilla? Frosting or no frosting? Frosting please. The heroic duo watched, completely stupefied, at the exchange going on between the dragon god and the shinobi. Ophis was acting so docile, even saying please. She had never done that in their presence before. They had never even seen the girl ask for something. She usually just demanded it. Naruto gestured towards one of his clones, sending the copy running towards the counter. With his clone doing his actual job, Naruto turned back towards the duo. Now, can you order something or get the hell? The blonde trailed off as something caught his eye. He turned his attention past Luffy and Fenrir, and towards the entrance of his shop. He had barely noticed only moments ago that the street outside of his shop had grown strangely still. Not a single pedestrian had walked by for minutes. He was now realizing why. A figure was standing outside the entrance of his shop. Naruto couldn't exactly tell its gender considering the fact that it was clothed in a long, flowing black cloak that covered the entirety of its body. The figure seemed to be floating several inches off the ground. A side that was his figure's body was clutched in its bony hand. Pluto. Naruto heard Luffy whisper out the name. He vaguely sensed Fenrir shifting behind him as he kept his eyes locked onto the figure. It hadn't moved since he laid his eyes on it, making it seem like a statue. My brother is already sending his intimidation squad, I see. Naruto briefly took his attention away from the cloaked figure to look back at Artemis. The goddess had managed to work her way from behind the counter and now stood slightly behind him with her hands on her hips. This is one of Hades' henchmen? Naruto questioned while looking back at the figure. Even with the broken eye contact, it hadn't moved a single inch from its spot. Yes. My uncle, as the god of death, employs the use of grim reapers to do his bidding. You are staring at the most notorious one beneath his control, Pluto. That creature is a disgrace to nature. Artemis commented in disgust as she stared at the figure. You don't like it? Naruto asked, sensing the woman's disgust. It carries around death everywhere it goes. Whole forests have been laid waste by the creature. A single touch from its side is said to be able to bring instant death while grievously wounding gods. He sounds tough, eh? Naruto said out loud to no one in particular. The idea of a death-causing weapon wasn't too much of a scary topic to him considering his fight with Kaguya. Having to dodge her all-killing ash bones had built up a sort of immunity to the stuff. He is. Hades more than likely sent it here to intimidate you. The goddess was upset as she spoke. Even her loyalty to her pantheon wouldn't allow her to overlook the blatant intimidation attempt. It disgusted her beyond belief. Well, too bad for him. He wasted his time. The shinobi promptly turned away from the Grim Reaper. Artemis watched in shock as the blonde casually accepted a plate full of cake from one of his henged clones. The goddess' eyes remained locked on his figure as he set the plate down in front of the office, earning him an appreciative nod from the dragon. He returned the nod with a smile before beginning to make his way back towards his counter. You're just going to leave that thing out in front of the store? Luffy shouted just as Naruto reached the entrance of the counter. The blonde briefly turned back towards her before looking at Pluto. He kept his eyes locked on the creature for several seconds before letting out a loud sigh while letting his head drop. You're right. I'll deal with him. Naruto grumbled before trudging his way over to the entrance of his shop. Artemis, Fenrir and Luffy watched anxiously as the blonde placed his hand on the door before swiftly pushing it open. Hey! The blonde didn't bother to restrain the volume of the voice as he spoke. The Grim Reaper's presence had managed to scare away any would-be pedestrians from the scene. Pluto said nothing in response to the blonde's shout. The Grim Reaper didn't even budge as the blonde stepped from outside his shop and onto the sidewalk. You're bothering my customers and you're starting to irritate me, so I'll just say this once, leave and go tell your boss to leave me alone. Naruto's face was set in a stony mask as he spoke to the bringer of death. He attempted to peer past the creature's dark cowl but was only met with a dark expanse of nothingness. It was as if the creature had no face to begin with. Silence was Pluto's answer, causing Naruto to frown. The shinobi took a step towards it, eliciting the first response from the Grim Reaper. Pluto subtly strengthened his grip on his scythe as Naruto moved towards it. With the taken step, Naruto was now only a foot away from the Grim Reaper. Even with his face set in his mask, the blonde was struggling to hold in shivers. The creature in front of him literally radiated death. His empathetic abilities and his connection to nature weren't required to sense this. He could feel his skin slowly rotting away in the Reaper's presence. Luckily for him, Kurama's chakra was doing a pretty good job in completely halting the decay. That's how it's going to be, eh? Naruto asked, only to relieve more silence. The blonde rolled his eyes at the expected response before reaching out with his right arm to push the Reaper. It was then when Pluto struck. The creature was completely silent as it moved. It glided its way out of Naruto's reach before sending its scythe screaming towards the blonde's midsection. The shinobi's other arm shot out and slammed against the weapon's shaft, stopping it in its tracks unknowingly. The blonde's action earned him surprised gasps from the goddess inside of his shock. Due to him being outside the shop, Naruto remained ignorant to the noise as he hopped into the air in order to send a kick to Pluto's face. He ended up clicking his tongue in annoyance when the kick passed harmlessly through a cloud of black smoke. Another asshole with an overpowered ability to become intangible. Naruto couldn't help but mumble to himself as he watched the black smoke condense back into the form of Pluto several yards away down the street. The Grim Reaper didn't look the least bit bothered by the kick as it floated with its scythe in hand. Sage mode did the trick last time. Should work now. The blonde thought to himself before briefly closing his eyes as he breathed. He began to draw in the natural energy of the world. What would have taken him half an hour at the beginning of his training now took seconds as his irises changed to the telltale bar shapes that indicated he was in sage mode. The moment Naruto opened his eyes, he flashed towards the Reaper. The creature didn't move an inch as the blonde crossed the distance between the two within a flash. It was only when the shinobi was within striking distance that the Reaper moved. He once again attempted to cut the blonde in half with the scythe with a casual but swift swing of the weapon. Unlike before, Naruto opted to block the blade of the scythe with his arm. The weapon slammed against the skin as if it had hit steel, jarring Pluto's arm and earning him another round of shock from Artemis. Naruto continued his stint of ignorance to this as he instead focused on punching the Reaper square in his cloak-covered chest. Much to the shinobi's delight, his fist seemed to hit flesh as the Reaper was sent flying backward from the force of the hit. Naruto watched as Pluto's figure tumbled down the street for dozens of yards before coming to a stop in a crumpled pile. I guess these Reapers can't take a hit. Naruto couldn't help but think to himself as he stared at the downed form of the Reaper. While his Sage mode did provide him an exponential boost in terms of strength, he had thought that Hades' top man would have been able to take the hit. Spoke too soon. He thought to himself just as Pluto began to move once more. The Reaper slowly rose back up to its floating position, using its scythe as leverage during the whole ordeal. Once it was back standing, Pluto raised an unsteady finger towards the blonde while tapping the butt of his scythe against the ground. Infant God! Naruto had to stop himself from flinching at the horribly raspy sound the Reaper made as it spoke. The noise seemed to grind away at his brain as it floated through the air. My master has warned you. You haven't heeded that warning. Death awaits you. The creature gasped out before lowering its arm. With what looked to be a pained movement, Pluto raised his scythe above his head before slamming it back down into the pavement. Naruto watched as a black portal formed beneath its feet. The Reaper remained floating over the portal for a brief moment, keeping its vision locked on Naruto, before slowly sinking down into the rift. The blonde did nothing as the portal closed behind Pluto, restoring the street back to its normal countenance. That's probably going to be troublesome. Naruto rehashed his old friend's catchphrase as he relaxed. Almost like water breaching a dam, people began to flood the empty street now that Pluto was gone. The shinobi paid their presence no mind as he walked back into his store. Infant God! Can't be a coincidence that both Pluto and the message on the wall called me that. It looks like Hades may really be the guy behind all of this. The blonde let out a huff at this. Ever since being introduced to gods, it seemed like they had been the source of all the trouble in his life ever since. And that trouble didn't look to be stopping anytime soon. Naruto was so caught up in his thoughts that he didn't notice the shocked faces on the supernatural creatures as he passed them on his way to the counter. It was only when one of his clones tapped him on the shoulder did the shinobi take notice of their expressions. You blocked Pluto's scythe with your forearm. Naruto had to lean his head back as Artemis suddenly invaded his personal space. The goddess' face was full of wonder as she closely examined his unscathed arm. This is amazing. I've only seen my uncle do such a thing, and that was only possible from affinity to death. It shouldn't be possible unless... Artemis trailed off as she shifted her attention on to Naruto's face. The blonde twitched uncomfortably under her gaze as she kept her grip tight on his arm. Unless what? Naruto questioned after several moments of awkward silence. At his question, Artemis promptly released her hold on his arm and stood up straight with a blank expression on her face. I apologize. I hope my warning has proven effective. I must take my leave now. Before Naruto could question the woman's odd behavior, she turned her back on him and dashed out the store. He could only watch as she disappeared into thin air on the sidewalk, drawing shocked gasps and looks from the pedestrians. That was odd, and it will probably bite me in the ass later. Naruto thought to himself. He hadn't known the woman for very long, but he had a pretty good sense of her to say that she probably didn't react like that very often. Especially in the presence of a male she just met. Naruto. The blonde turned his head towards the sound of the voice. He saw Ophis sat at her chair with a now empty plate in front of her. Another please. The dragon requested. Naruto shook his head at her behavior before making his way over towards her. He had other issues to attend to that didn't involve death gods and weird behavior from nature gods. He had a shop to run. If you're not buying something, get the hell out of my shop. Stop bothering my customers. It wasn't always an easy job. That's it for part 8. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.